Hello, everyone. My name is Stephanie Boozer, and I am happy to welcome you to today's CUGC Connect with NVIDIA and Lakeside. We're going to be talking about 3 steps for optimizing your VDI environment. Before we get to that, I want to make sure I send all of you over to mycugc.org to find your local group, to check out our forums, our blog posts. We have a lot of information out there for you. And if you're not connected with one of your local groups, you need to go out there and find yours and get to a meeting today. We have meetings all over the world, over 60 local groups. All right, before we get to our presenters, I want to introduce our moderator today. It's Greg Tiber. He is a Madison CUGC leader and a Citrix CTA, and you'll see his group, Madison CUGC, won a CUGC award this year. So congratulations, Greg, on that. Greg, you want to say hello really quickly?
Hello, and welcome to this, what's going to be a really great webinar with NVIDIA and Lakeside.
Awesome. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our presenters. So we have with us a few people today. We have Jared Cowart from NVIDIA. He's been a presenter for us on a few webinars here at CUGC. And from Lakeside, we also have Patricia Diaz and Ben Murphy, and they will come in and help present and answer some questions. So with that, before we get everything started, I have one question to ask you guys to set the tone for today. We'd like to know if you are already using NVIDIA Grid or Lakeside Systrack. And so answer that. We'll give that a few minutes for you to answer, and then that way Jared and Patricia and Ben will know how to steer the conversation today. Give you just a couple more seconds. We got about 30%. Looks like a lot of NVIDIA Grid so far. All right, I think that's a good representation of us. I share the results. So Jared, can you see those results?
I can. That's fantastic. Almost 80% NVIDIA Grid customers.
Awesome. All right. So Jared, I'll let you get us started. I'm going to send you the screen right now. And there you go. You should have it.
All right. Can everybody see?
I can see.
Fantastic. Well, again, love being on the CUGC webinars. These things are fantastic. Attendance is always great. Questions are always great. Feel free to ask any questions. Greg has been instructed to interrupt. So if you have any questions that come up with something I'm talking about, feel free to just throw them out there in the chat, and Greg will interrupt, and we'll get them addressed as soon as possible. So super excited to be here with Lakeside. Lakeside's been a great partner, one of the first management monitoring partners that we've worked with in regards to taking advantage of some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about here today. So kind of as an agenda here, some of the things I want to really focus on is the challenges that we deal with, with this virtual workspace life cycle. So when we first launched Grid about 5 years ago, for those of you who've been customers for a long time with maybe K1, K2 cards, it was very difficult to monitor GPU utilization within virtual machines. It was actually really problematic. When you monitored a virtual GPU, you would actually see the whole entire GPU below or in the host. So you would actually see the results of what somebody else was using. So it meant that we had to go on a huge project to figure out how to expose correct data in regards to what we're monitoring, so that vendors like Lakeside could consume that and put it into their proper reporting mechanisms. So that's the first thing we're going to talk about, is kind of some of the challenges that we see around the different phases of deployment, the different processes that we need to go through, and the different aspects that these SDKs give us. We'll talk about some of the virtual GPU monitoring features that maybe you guys don't know. Come October timeframe with the Grid 5.0 release, we actually announced some really cool enhancements. And companies like Lakeside are starting to consume those features within the SDK and providing just fantastic results. And then we'll talk about our ecosystem. Really, the ecosystem integrations here today is focused around Lakeside and how they can really connect the dots from not only within your virtual environment, but also your endpoints, and kind of pull that whole story together, which is, again, a really critical portion to this. So if you look at kind of NVIDIA's message statement around NVIDIA Grid, I leave this out here because you may have seen this slide before, or you might think you've seen this slide before. There's actually some changes in it, and this is because there's kind of a shift starting to occur, and I leave this in here because it's kind of cool to talk about, and maybe this might be another useful topic on one of our additional webinars or webinar down the road. But NVIDIA Grid's about GPU virtualization for any workload. Not only do we deliver GPU virtualization for graphics, which is what probably a lot of you are starting to, or have the 80% of the customers on the call are using, but we're also starting to see that being leveraged for more of your compute workloads. This might be machine learning, this might be AI inferencing, and this could be other types of things. And you know, really kind of starting this year to expand into the compute space is what you'll start to see there. So what is Grid for the, I guess, 20% that don't know? We'll leave this out here. But on the left-hand side, we know we've got a server, we've got a hypervisor, we've got our apps and virtual machines, and then we broker those out to our users, be it a Zen app deployment or a Zen desktop. The CPU has to act as a GPU in that type of deployment, so it emulates a GPU, which can cause, you know, additional overhead. It can't do all of the DirectX and OpenGL features, but that's our kind of traditional standard deployment. With NVIDIA Grid, what we do differently is we put an NVIDIA Tesla GPU in the server or multiples, and then we're able to create virtual GPUs off of that. Within the hypervisor, we install NVIDIA virtualization software, or what you may know as the vGPU manager. That vGPU manager then allows the carving up of the GPUs to create our virtual GPUs. Then we present those virtual GPUs to our virtual machines. We install the NVIDIA graphics driver, and then we can run our desktops and or applications that now have the ability to consume GPU resources. It's kind of how that all lays out. Within that NVIDIA graphics driver now, we've actually extended it, and we're extending it almost on every release by adding in more features, more components for exposing things around our SDK that companies like Lakeside can consume to provide you better visibility and to tell me which applications in my virtual deployment are consuming the most GPUs, things of that nature. So it gives us a lot of insight there. And that's feedback I would love from you guys. So hit me up on the forums, hit me up on Twitter, and let me know if there's management monitoring, like statistics, if there's things that you're not seeing. We would love to know and work on getting those types of things in the SDK, and then we can work with partners to make sure they get integrated into those solutions there. So if you look at the overall deployment, we've kind of started to break this down. You may have seen this triangle we had before. We're really starting to break this down into two classes of users. There's a knowledge user, and there's a creative technical professional. So if you look at the knowledge user, we're classifying these users as kind of everybody in your deployment. That's your office users, maybe users that are using Adobe products, a lot of browsers. The browser seems to be the big killer app that we're noticing. We've got, you know, YouTube and maybe internal training videos, but those users are all about kind of just knowledge consumption, and we're seeing that they're starting to need a lot more GPU, especially with Windows 10. So with Windows 10, be it right out of the gate that it's consuming 30% more GPUs, we're definitely seeing the need for more users there. And that's kind of a scalability play, and that falls into our virtual PC solution. On the far right side, these are our high-end users. So not sure what your customers are, I'd love to know, but when you're dealing with these types of applications, these users typically are dealing with our Quadro product in a physical workstation. So if they have a physical workstation, they're our Quadro customers. Since the Grid 5.0 release, now we can have compute capabilities in every Quadro profile. This is our performance user use case. So this is these Petrels and SolidWorks and these guys that run these types of users around kind of performance. So how does these users pair to what Grid license would run on top of the Tesla product within your server? Well, if it's a knowledge user, a business worker, that's going to fall into the NVIDIA Grid Virtual PC or maybe virtual applications for like Zen app type deployment. And this is all about density. This is about just getting that additional kind of GPU utilization so you can provide ultimately a much better experience there. From a board perspective, this typically falls under kind of the M10, which gives you max density. With M10, you can run up to 120 plus users on a host now. Nowadays as well, we've got blade options, so you can run a good amount of users in a blade. There's some blade solutions, I believe, that can have up to 4 of the P6s. So a lot of density options here around those knowledge users, which is pretty exciting. From a cost perspective, cost here is about $6 a day. That's including the hardware cost is what we kind of average that out to add a GPU to your deployment. So very affordable. We believe that GPU should be added, or vGPU should be added to every one of these use cases. On the creative side, this is the Quadro Virtual Data Center Workstation. And this is really for those higher end use cases. This is where maybe we deal with the NVIDIA new P40, or we deal with an M60 type solution. And this is for those kind of hardcore users, if you will, that might be running the SolidWorks types applications. So think designers, graphic engineers, people of that way, shape, or form fall into this bucket. So really simple now. We're trying to simplify the, what do I need? What license do I need? If you need compute capabilities, CUDA, those types of functions, that falls onto the right side, and then anything else is falling onto the left side there. So, like I mentioned at the beginning, visibility is key at all phases of our deployment. One of the things that's been critical, and the feedback that's come back from our customers, is they need to understand, did they oversubscribe their GPU? Did they undersubscribe it? Can they pull back? Does this user need a GPU? And so if you look at this, we need to have visibility in the design, assess, and pilot phase of our deployment. And that digital design phase very likely is going to take a partner like Lakeside, where we need to actually focus around assessments to determine what our users are currently using in the GPU that they have on their physical machine. This is really for the architects, the people that are planning out the deployment, trying to figure out what profile to assume or to size and be able to report on that type of data. From an operations perspective, this is our kind of IT administrators. We need to be able to monitor our day-to-day utilization of GPUs, what applications are consuming GPUs, and just kind of have that knock room visibility of, do I have a server that's everybody's consuming tons of GPUs, what's going on here? And then from a help desk perspective, it's really critical that we be able to deal with support resolution, or trouble resolution, issue resolution. So how can I go in and how can I see if I've got a problematic user, or a user that's maybe a noisy neighbor, and maybe it makes sense to look at some new stuff that we're doing in regards to being able to move that user off to their own place. But this is really kind of the visibility aspect of it. So how do we solve this? And like I mentioned at the beginning, it really came down into us having to figure out how to present data from the GPU correctly. So within the NVIDIA Grid driver, we actually now are exposing data from 2 different locations. So you've got the ability right from the host to grab data, or from the virtual machine, and the driver is the virtual machine. But now we've got an SDK that leverages NVML, leverages NVWMI, to present out the data of things that are happening. So with the Grid SDK 2.0 release, we announced application monitoring. So I can tell you the process that's consuming what portion of the GPU, be it encoding or decoding or frame buffer utilization, all that type of stuff now we can present out. And you'll realize here, as we get a little bit later on into the Lakeside piece of this, that they have the ability to consume all that data and report on it for you just fantastically. We have a handful of community members that have actually taken this SDK. There's a gentleman by the name of Jeremy Main. He actually works for NVIDIA. He's a solution architect. Some of you may have used the GPU profiler, but the GPU profiler is just something that he wrote by himself in his spare time, that he's consuming this stuff to be able to act as kind of a troubleshooting tool. By no means is it going to do the things that a Lakeside's going to do. But point being here is that you too can actually look at the SDK and consume data. There's Python bindings in there and PowerShell scripts if you're in a WMI based, all kinds of cool things that you can do there. And there's the link that you can go take a look at the SDK if you're one of those more coding types.
Jared, question for you.
Yeah.
For virtual PC knowledge/biz workers, when does the Grid license checkout occur? Does that occur when the VM boots?
It does. So when the VM boots is when the license checkout occurs.
Perfect, thank you.
No problem. Okay, so what can we actually monitor? So I'm not going to go through all of these items, but we've continually are adding to this list. So if you're monitoring from a host perspective, these are the types of things that we can monitor and pull into, solutions like Lakeside. And then on the guest perspective, we can grab all this data here as well. So lots of different things that we can consume, lots of different things that we can report on now. And when you monitor from the guest, it now reports correctly and gives you that guest capability. So kind of in ending this portion of it, if we look at the overall kind of lay of land here, this is really about an end-to-end user experience. Now from an end-to-end, this is where we bring Lakeside into the mix so that they can have the ability to deal with the endpoint. And not only the endpoint, but also the VDI perspective. But if you see here, this is about being able to monitor this session, everything that's going on. We've got to be able to monitor the host. So the host is critical around system health and being able to tell if GPUs are getting hot, being able to tell if we have a problem happening. It's about performance troubleshooting, seeing if a user is not dealing with enough performance. Maybe we need to reassign a different profile. And then it's about accurately sizing relating to kind of performance as well. The new stuff that we're starting to get a lot of really positive feedback is really around that app level monitoring. So that app level monitoring is the stuff that's super exciting, giving users the capability to figure out exactly what apps are consuming what portion of the GPU there. So if you look at what we've done here, it's really a complete solution that fits any deployment. So it's really about these standard GPU tools. So if you are used to using Perfmon or remote Perfmon, you have the capability to go in and use the NVIDIA SMI or the NVIDIA WMI or SMI components to consume that type of data. We also have the ability now to work with the ecosystem. So, our ecosystem with Lakeside here, they're now taking advantage of this. And we also have partners like VMware and both Citrix that now give you that capability. The whole open development platform. So if you guys wanted to be programmers, you now have that ability as well. You consume that, develop tools on your own, like, Jeremy Main with the GPU profiler. So one of the partners that we work with is VMware. We have a lot of deployments that actually work in desktop that are deployed on VMware. And we actually help develop a solution. So just to show you really quick before we jump to Lakeside, what we're doing with, the hypervisor vendors out there. From a VMware perspective, there is now a solution that you can deploy. So it's included in the product. You can actually, when you download your grid drivers, so it's just a box there to download this, and you can deploy this solution. This now gives you 5 different views of your deployment. This doesn't by any means go into the level of detail that a Lakeside's going to go into, but it's a solution that gives you the ability to do an environment view, host view, GPU view, vGPU view, and application view. So something maybe worth taking a look at. Within Citrix, we have, within Zen Server Host, we have the ability to monitor that temperature, that GPU real time, no historical stuff here, but gives you basic, but this gives you an idea of what these guys are doing around consuming this. So we've got the ability now, you see here within your Zen Center, you can go in and add these graphs that gives you some basic visibility. Within Director, Director now has the ability now, real-time only, to be able to go into the virtual machine. You can select GPU, and then you can see your graphs around GPU, memory, decode, encode. Personally, the decode or the encode is my favorite feature. When you have encode not happening, that means that we're not offloading the protocol to the GPU, and that's something that we definitely want to do. That frees up resources from a CPU perspective. That gives us some scalability back. If we have all of our virtual machines that are using the CPU to encode the H.264 portion of the HCX3D Pro protocol, that can impact performance quite significantly. So being able to leverage the GPU, it's free, it's just there. It's a great way to do that. So this is a good report for showing that. Lakeside's got a lot more granularity that they can get into, but it's still nonetheless kind of cool functionality. So one of the things before I hand over to Lakeside I wanted to quickly talk about was a tech preview that's going on. So that's why the big coming soon in the left corner. But this tech preview that we have going on is about migration. So part of the management monitoring features, and I mentioned earlier that if we've got a user that is excessively consuming GPUs, I might need to move them. And so we're currently in tech preview with a good amount of customers where we now have the ability to migrate our virtual machines from one host to another live without losing data. So this has also enabled things like snapshotting and really just gives us a lot more granularity here. So now we can take these virtual machines, we can replace a card, we can do maintenance or patching on that host, and then we can move them back. But no disruption or minimal disruption and no loss of data. So a lot of cool capabilities that now are coming to the solution. And this will be in the next release of NVIDIA Grid, that this functionality will be there. Just to prevent some questions, Greg, this will require Maxwell and beyond. So your M10, M60, Pascal series cards will now be a part of this migration capability. So kind of in summary, before we hand over to Lakeside here, this is really about gaining insights in your physical as well as your virtual deployment. So physical being kind of more your host. I think endpoint physical, Lakeside's going to talk to a little bit. It's about managing, better managing around application level monitoring. You guys have been asking for it. You know, tell me what applications are consuming GPUs. That data is now there, and that gives you the ability to now show your admin help desk what applications are consuming GPUs. Look for those crypto miners out there, whatever's going on. Leverage broad partner ecosystems, you know, around Director, VMware, and especially, you know, your Lakeside, out of box, you know, Perpmon, go for it. It's there. NVIDIA FMI is a great tool as well for if you're looking at GPUs from the host. You can get gather a lot of insight here. And this is really about flexibility to add, you know, any solution here around with the SDK and all the vendors that have taken advantage of that. So one of the things for the 20% on the call that aren't Grid customers is, how do I try this stuff? How do I see if it actually is a difference? And if you take out, you can, if you look here, you can try the VMware solution, you can try the Citrix solution, you can compare and contrast them. The correct link here should be TriGrid, not TriGrid VMware Citrix here, but the TriGrid VMware-Citrix. That'll take you to both platforms, be it Zen Server, be it VMware. All those different solutions are out there. And there's pre-installed apps so you can take a look, show your bosses how much better the experience is. But please take a look at that. It's free. Here's some resources. I'll leave it here as we hand over to Patricia. And what I'm going to do, Patricia, is I'm just going to give you keyboard mouse control, which you should already have. I just took it away. I'll give it back.
All right, let me see.
There you go. You should have it.
All right. Let me see. I'm trying to get on to the next slide, but it's not doing anything. There we go. Okay, perfect. All right. Thank you, Jared. Again, my name is Patricia Diaz. I'm the head here of product marketing at Lakeside Software. But also joining me is my colleague, Ben Murphy, who's the Director of Applied Engineering. Thank you all for being here. So today I'll be sharing with you a three-step approach to optimizing your VDI environment for that end user experience using that real endpoint data. First assess, then plan, then continuously monitoring your environment. It's an approach I'm very excited to share with you because our customers have used it when not only looking to adopt NVIDIA technology, but also when looking to adopt new technologies and monitoring, you know, their existing NVIDIA environments. Before I jump in, though, into those three steps, for those of you who aren't familiar with us at Lakeside, Lakeside is an organization that has been around for 20 years, bringing really endpoint visibility to IT teams in order to help them quantify and also improve that enterprise end user experience within their environments. Our flagship product is called Systrack, if that rings a bell for some of you. I noticed there was about 11% of you that are familiar with us. It is a workspace analytics solution that takes performance data, usage data directly from the endpoint and then reports it back to IT, which can then be used to design and to support an environment that really takes into consideration how technologies and how IT services are impacting that end user experience and end user productivity. So for instance, using Systrack, you can look at any given technology and have all the endpoint data you need to adopt it more confidently and answer questions like, is X technology the right fit for my environment? Which users would need said technology based off of real monitored usage, right? How is the rollout for X technology impacting the performance at the endpoint? So questions like that, really having the right endpoint data in order to make those decisions more confidently. Now, because Systrack gathers thousands of performance and usage metrics from the endpoint, we've seen that our customers use us for a number of different projects, a lot of which you see on the screen right now. But when it comes to NVIDIA technology, we've seen our customers use Systrack for this three-step approach many times that I'll be sharing with you today to optimize our VDI environments for that end user experience. But that's a little bit about who we are and what we do. Do we have any questions out there, Greg, on us?
No, just there was one question, and this could be for you or Jared, but the question was, how do we know when we need GPUs, when we need to move to this kind of technology?
I can take that. I think, go ahead, Ben, you got it?
Sure, yeah, thanks, Jared. So this is Ben. I was going to say, I think that's a perfectly fair question, and I think there's a couple of different answers to that. So the intent of kind of what Patricia is introducing here now is a strategy that would kind of help you make that decision on your own. So to try and understand in your environment right now, and let's say that it's a physical environment that you're looking to migrate into a virtual environment or even an existing virtual environment, you really want to understand what the state of consumption looks like now to be able to make a good informed decision about what belongs in your new environment. So in general, if you have a lot of graphical workloads out there in an existing physical environment, in order to make sure that you're giving someone a very high quality experience on a virtual machine, you're going to have graphics virtualization be a part of that. So that acceleration is going to be necessary. Now, one thing that you will find though is even in casual workloads, so the people that you might anticipate really don't have that much of a GPU usage, from a day-to-day kind of activity standpoint, actually really could benefit from graphics acceleration as well. So in our mind, this is really where we see the idea of starting off with assessing what that current workload looks like, playing a very serious role, and using that as a baseline for deciding who gets what can be a very useful way to make sure you're accurately picking what you need to deploy in a net new environment. So Jared, I don't know if that kind of jives with what you were going to say, but our experience is lots of people can benefit. It's really good to identify who benefits the most and use that to plan out what profiles that you might need.
Nope, I think you summed up exactly where I was going to kind of go with that. It's really just important to understand. We are starting to see Windows 10 users just needing a GPU. That's kind of the de facto, if you're Windows 10 VDI, you're looking there, that definitely probably has the best ROI, best kind of proof point around data that your industry has proved, or that Lakeside's proved with industry reports. But I think you nailed it. It's important to be able to assess and be able to quantify that and present that to management of here's why we need that. Here's the applications we have that are consuming it right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I go through this three-step approach, I'll touch on that too, specifically like as Ben mentioned with Windows 10 and the graphical implications there and some of the findings that we've seen in our community so far. So on to the good stuff. When it comes to VDI environments, we found that our customers with both graphics heavy and knowledge workers that Jared was talking about earlier have a very hard time understanding what are the graphical requirements for our virtualized environments. And this has been a pretty common concern for a number of the organizations we work with, particularly now as they continue to migrate to applications and OSs that are designed for a much richer end user experience, namely Windows 10. So when it comes to virtualized environments, we've worked with our customers on this kind of simple three-step approach. First, assess your environment, right, to understand, is this new OS or application a smart move for my virtualized environment? Which users are the best or worst candidates for that move, right? What are the graphical needs within my environment for each end user persona, right, or end user group? Secondly, plan for that rollout. Determine, okay, what is the best hardware software combination for my environment, and what users does it make sense to migrate first, etc. And then lastly, monitoring, right? Monitoring the steady state of that environment to make sure that end user experience is the same or ideally better after any given rollout. So to walk you through the next three steps, I think it would be better to take an example. So let's assume you're looking to move to or move everyone to Windows 10 and you have a virtualized environment, right? So the first step is assessing your environment with that real endpoint data, endpoint performance, endpoint usage, or IT or usage of IT resources. For this step, it's important to consider that graphics-heavy users are not just designers and gamers anymore, right? And we've touched on this so far. We found that even enterprise workers use a number of graphics-heavy or graphics-intensive applications, and that graphics usage increases about, we found about 32% from Windows 10 to Windows 7 from Windows 7 to Windows 10. Right, so if you're moving to Windows 10, consider that it does have a higher graphical requirement, and that surprisingly, so do a lot of new versions of very commonly used applications, namely the Office suite, which has been pretty surprising to some of us. So the importance of assessing your environment properly and using real endpoint data to do so is that much more important, especially given the graphical implications of moving to Windows 10. So fairly recently, in fact, we conducted a quick study of our Systrack community of users, and we were able to back up with data that systems that didn't have discrete GPUs will average higher CPU usage, as you can see there on this screen. So that's by assessing your environment. We're talking about scoping your environment to determine if the move even makes sense for your environment, and where it doesn't, right? What expanded functionalities, what expanded, maybe GPU capabilities do you need to make that move happen, particularly, in the case of a move to Windows 10.
And one question there, Patricia, in regards to the assessment, is there a way that Systrack/NVIDIA tools can tell us we have CPU emulated graphics that can be accelerated and quantify the benefit? Or can that only be done with testing on the old system and the new system?
Sure, so I can answer that question. This is Ben again. I would say that there are a couple of different design points that you can use for that. We can certainly identify when applications are invoking graphics and there is not a GPU currently present. And we can also tell you when an application is invoking graphics without invoking a GPU if someone happens to have that kind of a scenario for a custom app, let's say, or of some kind. Not really sure how that would work. But the idea is that with the initial collection, we would definitely be able to say these applications specifically fall into kind of a high graphics consumption profile. So that's certainly something that we'd be able to identify in the course of the assessment.
And then another question from a current Lakeside customer: what metric within Systrack should I look at on the guest to determine those that would benefit from GPU acceleration?
Sure, yeah, so I can answer that question too. And the answer is, I would say that if you currently do not have vGPU deployed, that your best bet is probably to split this into a couple of categories. I personally would probably look at the graphics acceleration details that you can find in, for example, software packages, and you might want to look at the graphics time per system. So there's a computer performance data set that actually contains basically how much time are people actually attempting to make use of graphics. Another area that would be very interesting in conjunction to that would be the active compute resource usage. So active CPU in conjunction with higher graphical usage, and you can actually get down to the individual time correlated parts of this too in Resolve. That gives you a good indicator of where you've got people who might be driving more graphically intensive workloads that in the current iteration would only have the ability to make use of the CPU in order to encode or decode.
Cool, thanks, Ben. And on that assessment too, at the end of our quick presentation here, I'll show you how you can use Systrack to take that, first assessment step and do a free GPU assessment on your environment too. All right. So the second step is to plan, right? Plan for the rollout. Once you've assessed your environment for graphics needs, make sure you know which users will need expanded GPU capabilities and what their usage is of those IT resources and services. Determine how many of your users have high, medium, or low graphics consumption. Determine which NVIDIA solution is the best fit for your environment, and so on. So the screenshot you see there is some of the information that you can get from that initial assessment. So that way you can plan, okay, for instance, for expanded GPU capabilities like discrete GPUs. And most importantly, in this plan stage, you can make sure you're investing in the expanded functionalities you need without having to over or underestimate the number of users that might need those, right? In this case, discrete GPUs, right? And lastly, the last step is to monitor. Not only, at least at Lakeside, we don't see that as a third step. Always, we see this as a continuous step, something to do before, during, and after any given rollout. It's important to monitor the environment for overall performance and for that end user experience, not just to determine and correct any negative impacts from, say, a Windows 10 rollout, and what that might have brought to end users, but also to help support an environment that takes this three-step, right, assess, plan, monitor approach to any new tech adoptions, right? Obviously, no IT environment is static. So you will need to continue to deploy technologies. Your users will continue to adopt technologies on their own that might or might not be graphics intensive. So monitor your environment even after that initial rollout to understand, are you providing your users with the graphical processing that they need? You need to make sure your rollouts are effective and make adjustments where needed, and to help plan for future technologies, just as this example we just walked through. But those are kind of the three steps that, at least from a Lakeside perspective, with Systrack, we help support with, again, that endpoint visibility with that data directly from the end user and their experience. So in terms of that first step, we do have a free assessment at nvidia.lakesidesoftware.com. Where, if this sounded interesting to you, I would suggest you give it a try. It basically has Systrack analyze your environment and provide a pretty detailed recommendation report on what is the best NVIDIA GPU hardware and software combination for your environment. Again, this is for that first step in terms of planning, in terms of continuously monitoring that solution. Then Systrack does provide that endpoint visibility to kind of help move through that kind of three-step approach. That's what I wanted to share with you. Do we have any questions? Any more questions out there?
Well, one of the questions I had was how is Systrack gathering that data from the endpoints?
Yeah, so I guess going back a couple of slides, we basically have a Systrack agent that is installed on a physical or virtual endpoint. It gathers and sends a summary of that endpoint data to the Systrack master, right? And then an IT admin on the other end can monitor and leverage those insights within the Systrack instance via dashboards and whatnot. So it is via an agent that's deployed, directly on that endpoint.
And then another question that came through is how close to real time is the Systrack data? Can it be used for real time troubleshooting?
Yeah, and Ben, you can expand more on that, but we do, when it comes to digital experience monitoring, we do consider that kind of a two-pronged historical plus real-time approach is really the way to go. So we do have real-time capabilities, but we also have, we go back, what is it, Ben, like 5 years in the past with endpoint data?
Yeah, so default is 3 years. So to answer the question, absolutely. The historical data that we've been looking at, or at least alluding to, starts as real-time data that then gets kind of captured in a black box format that you can look at and also trend over time. So for the monitoring and management side of this, the real-time pieces, that is present, alertable, thresholdable, and then we can use the long-term trending data for the kind of more long-term planning. So how people who have this kind of system have a tendency to use this kind of GPU, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what Patricia was talking about, is kind of the split need. So for the operational management component that Jared talked about in kind of his piece, that's where our real-time data comes in. And then there's the other piece, which is the long-term trending or insights that are derived from that real-time data as we store it historically.
Great, great. That's the last of the questions. If there's anybody else in the audience that has more questions, please let us know. One more question: how often does that data refresh?
So I'll split my answer in this into a couple of pieces. So the refresh of the actual data on the endpoint, meaning how often are we collecting it? Again, just to recap, we've got an agent out there, so we're actually continuously collecting that data. So in terms of the time slices, I mean, I think that's sub-second intervals. We make a record of that every 15 seconds, but you have the ability to set threshold-based alerts that would be more granular than that. That's then what you would see in, for example, like Resolve. So the other side of this, though, would be how frequently does this refresh on the top level? Normally, by default, we're sending the non-operational part about every 24 hours up to the top level. So that's the trending historical information. And then that'll get populated into our visualization tools. So really the answer is it depends on what type of data you're talking about. The real-time operational stuff, in practical terms, you could say about every 15 seconds, give or take. Reality is more granular than that. And then the top level information by default is every 24 hours, but that is a configurable option as well.
Awesome. That's the last of the questions that I had.
All right. Do we have more to go from you, Jared, or are we wrapping up here at the end?
No, I thought my part of it. Thank Lakeside for joining us. It's awesome to have them, and they have been extremely valuable in the development of the software kind of kit that we expose this data to. Giving us lots of feedback, giving us lots of industry data as well, which has been really great to kind of help garner how things and what features are being added. So again, like I mentioned earlier, if there is specific GPU related components that you're looking at, definitely find me on Twitter and let me know. Most part, I've asked this a lot of people, and I think we've done a pretty good job exposing most of the stuff that's needed around that stuff. So again, thanks to Lakeside for being on the call. Definitely take advantage of the assessment. It's been a huge part of helping accelerate a lot of these deployments and kind of prove value in showing that and why this is needed.
Absolutely, thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys for being on today. Before we wrap up, I just have a couple of housekeeping details for you. We will send out a link to the recording from today and an email. It should come tomorrow or possibly Friday. I'll need to do a little editing to get those intro slides back in so everyone can see Greg's smiling face. Also, if you opted in at registration for a chance to win an NVIDIA Shield, we will choose the winner off the air, and we will post the winner on Twitter and at mycugc.org. So follow us on Twitter and check out the forums. I included a link to the forum thread for this webinar in the chat window for you. So if you have more questions or want to talk about the webinar, you can certainly have those conversations there. And finally, what I also have in the chat window for you is a link to a very short survey. It's very quick, it's anonymous, and we always like to hear your feedback and get your thoughts on the webinars. They help us plan future webinars for the community. And with that, I think I will let you guys have some more time back to your day. I want to thank Ben and Patricia from Lakeside and Jared from NVIDIA. It was great having you on today. And thank you to Greg for keeping an eye on those questions for us. Really appreciate that. All righty, everyone, I hope you.
Thanks, all.
All right, everybody, I hope you have a great afternoon, and check us out on mycugc.org. See you on another webinar here soon.